hmm just looking at Section 10, yeah. hmm the United Nations may expel or exclude persons from the headquarters district, yes, for violation of its regulations adopted under Section 8 or for other cause. Yeah. Persons who violate such regulations shall be subject to other penalties, yeah, or to detention under arrest only in accordance with the provisions of such laws or regulations as may adopted by the appropriate American authorities. Yes. But it's number 8. Yeah. See, the United Nations shall have the power to make regulations, yes, operative within the headquarters district for the purpose of establishing therein conditions in all respects necessary for the full execution of its functions. Yeah. No federal, state, or local law or regulation of the United States which is inconsistent with a regulation of the United Nations, yes, which is local law regulation, which is with the regulations of the United Nations authorized by this section shall, yes, to the extent of such inconsistency be applicable within the headquarters district. Yeah. Any dispute between the United Nations and the United States as to whether a regulation of the United Nations is authorized by this section, or as to whether a federal, state, or local law or regulation is inconsistent with any regulation of the United Nations authorized by this section, shall be promptly settled as provided in Section 21. Pending such settlement, the regulation of the United Nations shall apply, and the federal, state, or local law or regulation shall be inapplicable, yes, in the headquarter districts. Yeah. Now, the inapplicability of federal, state, local law, or regulation, yeah, would mean that when getting a dissolution of marriage from the United Nations, yes, any of the regulations of the United Nations authorized in the district, yes, is applicable to my situation. Yeah. hmm Now, I know that you think, well, it's Washington state law that governs the actual regulations of a United Nations marriage certificate. And as many times as I told you, yes, federal, state, local law, or regulation is inapplicable because I gave you a copy of the actual dissolution of marriage that you need to have, yeah, to be able to dissolve a United Nations marriage. Now, I'm wanting to get divorced, yes, and I realize, yeah, that it should be available the necessary forms. Yeah. Now, what if the United Nations wanted to speak to myself, yes, my wife, and my 5 sons, yes, and they had the actual authority of law because of their regulations, which, as it applies to the issuance of marriage certificates and certificates of dissolution of marriage. I would say that federal, state, or local law or regulation is inconsistent, yes, with the regulations of the United Nations as authorized by federal law, yes, to be able to get a dissolution of marriage. Now, your thought was, well, Paul needs to borrow a cell phone, yes, spend all day on the phone calling these various individuals in the employment of the United Nations, yes, saying, well, we got married in Kosovo and our United Nations marriage certificate, we no longer want to be married. But their regulations for the dissolution of marriage are very different than Washington state laws. Yes. Now I'm thinking, because of the stipulation and order, that we would have to include that when petitioning the United Nations for dissolution of marriage. Now, the validity of the actual marriage. I would say that it should be annulled, yes, because my wife did not represent herself, yes, as having any twin. As being involved in any top secret family. As having any contractual obligation to any billionaire. Right. To hold my son's hostage. Yes. Now, when showing the United Nations what the state of Washington has done, yes, where I, as a father, did not get any notice of court hearings, Mhm. I was arrested at the same time as being summoned the petition of dissolution. Yeah, that's right. For a protection order that was issued without the stipulation in order from the Gomanian Organic Act. I feel that we have a very strong case in the United Nations to not only get the dissolution of marriage, yes, but for me to sue this state, every state, and the United States federal government for allowing. Ooh, ooh,